Since inclusivism is the new kid on the block, and a rather unusual view at that, let's take a look at what Rahner says motivates them. As we will see, what motivates the view is in very large part the problem of religious disagreement. Here's what Rahner says. The theory of anonymous Christianity arose from two facts. First, the possibility of supernatural salvation and of a corresponding faith which must be granted to non-Christians even if they never become Christian. And secondly, that salvation cannot be gained without reference to God in Christ, since it must, in its origin, history, and fulfillment, be a theistic and Christian salvation. Okay, that's the first half of the quote, and notice what he says. Two things. One, it would be an awfully restrictive view to limit salvation to just those who were adherents of the Christian religion. If you find that view a bit puzzling, there's a way to look at it where it shouldn't puzzle you that much. The question is, what kinds of people who didn't know about Jesus could be saved on the Christian story? And even on the most conservative Christian theologies, there are Old Testament saints who are among the redeemed. Old Testament saints did not know about Jesus, had not heard about Jesus, so technically could not have achieved salvation by placing their faith in a first century Jewish rabbi. So what Rahner says about that seems like it has to be true in some sense or other. The second thing he says is, but Christianity is true, so the story of salvation that is generated to accommodate people who've never heard or people who never did hear about Jesus has to be the Christian message in some sense or other anyway. Okay, those are the 2 points. Let's continue with the quote. One can only escape this conclusion if one adopts the pessimistic outlook common in the past and disputes the possibility of supernatural salvation for such people, thereby consigning them to hell or limbo, or if one grants salvation merely on the basis of human respectability without reference to God in Christ, or if finally one refuses to think about the Christian character in these cases, thus endangering the universality of Christ's redeeming action, which should, on the contrary, be firmly maintained. Again, I note the explicitly Christian terminology and thinking of Rahner, which, again, shouldn't surprise us since he's a Christian theologian. It may be what's driving the story here. What are your alternatives to endorsing this idea of anonymous Christians? One is to adopt the harsh outlook. He calls it the pessimistic outlook. But the harsh outlook is the vast majority of people are headed for hell because they don't know anything about Jesus and aren't adherents of the Christian religion. That's the pessimistic outlook. Second possibility, it's not a matter of theology or salvation or grace or anything like that generates salvation. It's instead just a generic story about human decency and respectability. That's what gets you salvation. And Rahner points out that bypasses everything about the story of Christianity. So if Christianity is the true religion, that's an unacceptable story as to how salvation is achieved. Third, Rahner points out that you can look at people who are not adherents of the Christian religion and find glorious human beings among the groups. Rahner says, take a look. Do you not see signs of Christian character? If you do, and you reject the idea that they can achieve salvation, there's something about rejecting the universality of the Christian story of grace that you are rejecting. So Rahner thinks there's all sorts of reasons why you should endorse this idea of anonymous Christians. And it's worth noting that it was encoded into official Catholic teaching in Vatican II. So it is something that has the status of orthodoxy. Notice how Rahner's theory of anonymous Christians, though it's specific to the Christian religion, could be put to use by defenders of any religion whatsoever. They could just generalize from what he says about Christianity to the distinctive elements of their religion. In each case, adopting the inclusivist stance of Rahner allows a solution to the problem of religious disagreement. The exclusivist just says there's only one true religion, and everybody who's not an adherent is lost. They're wrong. They may be reasonable in the viewpoints that they hold, but they're wrong, and that's deadly. Salvation isn't possible for them. The pluralist is more moved by the problem of religious disagreement, and so endorses a multiplicity of truth possibilities. Truth is not restrictive in the way the exclusivist says, and there's a long-standing tradition, even in standard conservative Christian theology, about the transcendence of God that implies something like ineffability with respect to the nature of God. Whatever you can say about God, it's very hard to say something that's true. So if God's ineffable, the pluralist has something to place. So if God is ineffable, that plays into the hands of the pluralist in a certain way. Truth can't be as restrictive as the exclusivist says. On the other hand, the pluralist is stuck with this pluralist conception of truth, some sort of relativistic notion of truth, which turns out to be hard to defend, hard to explain, hard to understand. Here, the inclusivist says, I have a position that allows us to evade the difficulties with pluralist and relativistic conceptions of truth, but also allows us to evade the pessimistic and harsh outlook of exclusivists, according to which most of humanity is damned. That makes inclusivism an interesting position to consider and think about. I'm prejudiced on this score because I have defended inclusivism in print. I'll put a source you can look at if you're interested in seeing what I have to say about it. But in any case, we've learned enough about the three positions. It's time to take a look at the readings.